very shy about meeting you. We have been going out a long time and...
Something happened inside the palace in early 2025 that nobody who witnessed it is likely to forget in a hurry. Prince William made a move against Camilla's closest allies that was so deliberate, so precisely executed, and so completely unexpected that it left experienced palace staff visibly shaken. And what it reveals about the monarchy William is already building changes the picture entirely. The move nobody inside the palace saw coming. There are moments inside institutions as ancient and as layered as the British monarchy that serve as genuine turning points. Moments where the careful and accumulated weight of unspoken tension finally resolves itself into action, and where the action taken is so clear and so deliberate that everyone who witnesses it understands immediately that something fundamental has changed. Those moments are rare in the palace context, precisely because the institution trains its most senior figures from an early age to manage conflict through indirection, through the slow and patient manipulation of circumstance, rather than through anything that might be described as direct confrontation. The culture of the palace is one in which things are rarely said plainly, in which disagreements are managed through protocol and positioning rather than through open challenge, and in which the maintenance of visible harmony is treated as an obligation that transcends almost every other consideration, which is precisely why what Prince William did in the early weeks of 2025 was so startling to those who witnessed it. It was not indirect. It was not managed through the slow and patient manipulation of circumstance over an extended period of time. It was deliberate, it was specific, and it was executed with a precision and a swiftness that left those inside the palace with very little room to misread its meaning or to comfort themselves with the possibility that what they were seeing was anything other than what it clearly was. William had made a decision, and the decision was to shut down. In terms as unambiguous as the palace's internal culture permits, the network of influence that Camilla had carefully and patiently constructed around herself within the institution over the years since she became queen consort. To appreciate the full weight of what happened, it is necessary to understand something about the particular moment the palace was navigating at the time. The early weeks of 2025 were a period of quiet but unmistakable internal recalibration within the institution. King Charles, managing his health with the disciplined stoicism that defines his public character, while remaining deeply engaged with the business of the monarchy, had been having conversations about the institution's future direction that were gradually and meaningfully shifting the internal balance of influence within the palace. Catherine's expanded role, discussed at length in conversations that had reached a select group of insiders, was part of that shift, but it was not the only part. Running alongside, and in some ways preceding the changes surrounding Catherine, was a separate and equally significant process of reassessment about the role and reach of Camilla's network within the institution's daily functioning. William had been observing that network for some time, with an attention and a patience that those around him describe as characteristic of the way he approaches institutional problems that he judges to require careful handling. He does not move quickly when he assesses a situation as complex and as sensitive as the internal dynamics of a family that is simultaneously a constitutional institution. He watches, he listens. He builds a picture through accumulated observation rather than through impulsive reaction. And when he judges that the picture is complete enough and the moment right enough to act, he acts with a decisiveness that surprises people who have mistaken his patience for passivity. By early 2025, the picture William had been building was complete. What he had concluded through a process of observation and private deliberation that those closest to him describe as having been underway for the better part of several months was that Camilla's inner circle had grown into something that was actively and consequentially interfering with the direction the institution needed to take as it prepared for the transition to his generation. It was not, sources suggest, a conclusion he had reached with any particular personal bitterness or emotional charge. It was a judgment made in the same institutional frame that he applies to most significant decisions, that a specific and identifiable problem required a specific and identifiable response. And the response he chose was unambiguous enough that even those most invested in the continuation of the existing arrangements could not pretend to misunderstand it. The shockwave that followed his initial moves spread through the palace with a speed and a completeness that took even experienced observers by surprise. Staff who had worked within the institution through multiple periods of internal tension and family difficulty described the atmosphere in the days and weeks that followed as unlike anything they had previously encountered. Not because the moves themselves were externally dramatic or publicly visible. They were neither, but because of the clarity of the signal they sent to everyone within the institution who understood how power actually moves inside the palace. Something had changed, something important, and it had changed because William had decided it would. Who Camilla's inner circle actually is, and why it matters. To understand the full significance of what William did, it is essential to first understand precisely what he moved against. The phrase inner circle is one that gets used casually in coverage of royal affairs, often as a vague gesture toward the idea of advisors and confidants without much precision about who those people actually are, what they actually do, or why their position within the institutional structure matters in ways that extend well beyond the merely personal. In Camilla's case, the inner circle is neither vague nor casually assembled. It is the product of years of deliberate and patient relationship building by a woman who understood from very early in her royal life that her ability to navigate the institution's demands would depend heavily on the quality and the loyalty of the people she kept closest to her. Camilla arrived in the formal royal structure under circumstances that were uniquely challenging, even by the standards of an institution that has historically not been generous to those who approach it from complicated personal histories. The public hostility she faced in the years following her relationship with Charles and its role in the breakdown of his first marriage was real, sustained, and genuinely threatening to her ability to build any kind of stable position within the family and the institution. Her response to that hostility was not defensive or withdrawn. It was strategic. She began carefully and over a long period of time to build around herself a network of people whose loyalty to her was personal rather than merely professional, whose investment in her success within the institution was genuine and deep, and whose presence within the palace's daily operations gave her a form of reach and awareness that extended well beyond what her formal position alone would have provided. That network, by the time William turned his attention to it in the months leading up to early 2025, had become a genuinely significant feature of the palace's internal landscape. It included senior advisors whose counsel shaped decisions across a range of institutional matters that might not, on the surface, have appeared directly connected to Camilla's remit as queen consort. It included members of staff whose positions gave them access to information and to informal channels of communication that are, in a palace context, as consequential as any formal briefing process. And it included a number of figures whose primary institutional loyalty was understood by those who knew the palace well to run to Camilla rather than to the broader institution or to the hierarchy of the family above her. What this network gave Camilla was something considerably more valuable than mere companionship or personal support, though it provided those things too. It gave her a form of institutional intelligence, a continuously updated awareness of what was being discussed, decided, and planned within the palace's inner workings. That meant she was rarely, if ever, caught genuinely off guard by developments that affected her position or her interests. It also gave her a subtle but meaningful capacity to influence the flow of information within the institution, to ensure that certain things were communicated in certain ways to certain people, and that the framing of decisions and developments within the palace's internal conversation reflected perspectives and priorities that were aligned with her own. For much of the period since Charles's accession in September 2022, this network had operated with considerable effectiveness and with relatively little external challenge. The early years of a new reign are inherently focused on establishment and consolidation, on building the working patterns and relationships that will define the institutional character of the new monarch's time on the throne. In that context, Camilla's network had found a reasonably comfortable space to operate, providing her with the influence and the awareness she needed while remaining sufficiently embedded in the normal functioning of the palace to avoid attracting the kind of focused attention that might have prompted an earlier response. But as the palace's attention turned increasingly toward questions of transition, toward the preparation of Catherine for her future role and the broader alignment of the institution's priorities with the generation that would lead it next, the network's relationship with the direction of travel became more visibly and more consequentially misaligned. And it was that misalignment, sources suggest, that William had been observing with growing and eventually decisive attention throughout the later months of 2024 and into the opening weeks of 2025. What William did and how he did it. The specific actions William took to dismantle the effective reach of Camilla's inner circle within the palace were not dramatic in the way that public confrontations or formal institutional announcements are dramatic. They did not involve raised voices in palace corridors or formal communications that left paper trails visible to outside observers. They were, in keeping with the culture of an institution that conducts its most significant business through the careful management of access, information, and positioning rather than through open declaration, quiet in their individual expression but unmistakable in their collective intent and their cumulative effect. The first and perhaps most structurally significant move William made concerned access. In the palace context, access is the foundational currency of influence. Who has the ability to enter which rooms, to be present in which conversations, to receive which briefings, and to participate in which decision-making processes defines the actual shape of power within the institution far more precisely than any organizational chart or formal title. William began, in the early weeks of 2025, to make a series of adjustments to the access arrangements that had been established around his own office and his own working processes. Those adjustments were targeted and specific. Individuals whose primary loyalty was understood to run to Camilla's network, rather than to the broader institutional structure found themselves, through a series of individually unremarkable but collectively decisive changes, at a greater remove from the conversations and the decisions that mattered most within William's sphere of operations. The second move concerned information. Alongside the changes in access arrangements, William made equally targeted adjustments to the channels through which information from his office flowed into the wider palace. This is a more subtle form of institutional action than direct exclusion, but in some respects it is more consequential because it is more difficult to challenge openly without revealing that the person making the challenge has been monitoring information flows in ways that are themselves difficult to defend. Certain individuals within Camilla's network, who had previously been in a position to maintain a relatively clear picture of what was being discussed and decided within William's circle, found that picture becoming progressively less complete, not through any dramatic severing of communication, but through the kind of gradual and deniable reduction in shared information that an experienced operator can execute without providing any single moment that could be pointed to as an obvious act of hostility. The third and in many ways most telling move concerned personnel. Within the palace, the movement of staff between different royal households and different institutional functions is a routine and unremarkable feature of how the institution manages its human resources. It happens regularly and for a wide range of entirely practical reasons that have nothing to do with the management of internal political dynamics. William used that cover of routine with considerable skill. Several individuals whose presence within particular institutional positions had, over time, come to serve the interests of Camilla's network in ways that went beyond their formal job descriptions, found themselves, in the early weeks of 2025, quietly redirected toward roles that removed them from the specific points of access and influence they had previously occupied. Each individual move was defensible on straightforwardly practical grounds. The pattern they formed together was anything but coincidental. What made William's approach particularly effective and particularly difficult for those on the receiving end to respond to directly was the combination of precision and deniability that characterized every element of it. Nothing he did constituted a dramatic and openly challengeable act of institutional aggression. There was no single moment that Camilla's allies could point to as a clear provocation or a violation of the norms that govern relationships within the royal family. But the cumulative effect of every individual move, taken together and understood in the context of the clear directional intent behind them, was unmistakable to everyone inside the palace who had the experience and the awareness to read what was happening. William was not simply making administrative adjustments. He was sending a message, and the message was being received with complete clarity by everyone it was intended for. Sources familiar with the situation describe the execution of William's moves as reflecting a level of institutional sophistication that surprised even those who knew him well, and had long understood that his apparent approachability and relative informality concealed a serious and strategic intelligence. He had chosen his moment carefully, his methods precisely, and his targets with a specificity that demonstrated a detailed and current understanding of the internal landscape he was reshaping. This was not the action of someone reacting impulsively to a frustration that had finally boiled over. It was the action of someone who had been planning, observing, and waiting for exactly the right conditions to act effectively, and who had concluded with confidence that those conditions had arrived. The staff who were left, stunned. Palace staff are not, as a general rule, easily rattled. The people who work within the institution at every level, from the most senior courtiers to the household staff who manage the daily domestic rhythms of royal life, are selected and trained with an eye toward exactly the kind of unflappable discretion that the palace's functioning requires. They have seen across the years of their service a remarkable range of human drama played out against the backdrop of one of the world's most scrutinized institutions. They have navigated the turbulence of family conflicts, the pressures of public crises, and the quiet but constant tension of an institution that must simultaneously manage its internal humanity and its external mythology. They are, by professional formation and personal temperament, people who do not startle easily, which makes the consistency with which sources describe the atmosphere inside the palace in the weeks following William's moves as genuinely stunned all the more significant and all the more telling. The word that recurs most frequently in accounts from those with knowledge of the internal reaction is not anger, though that was present in some quarters. It is not confusion, though the speed and the precision of what had happened left some people scrambling to fully understand what they were observing. The word that recurs most consistently is stunned. A recognition felt across a surprisingly wide cross-section of palace staff at various levels of seniority and institutional proximity that something had happened that fell outside the parameters of what they had understood to be possible within the current configuration of the royal family's internal relationships. Part of what generated that sense of stunned recognition was the source of the action. William's public image, carefully and consistently cultivated over years of visible royal service, is one of a man who is serious and capable, but also fundamentally committed to the maintenance of family harmony and institutional stability. He has always presented himself, and has always been presented by those around him, as someone who manages difficulty through patience and diplomacy rather than through direct and potentially destabilizing action. The events of early 2025 confronted that image with a reality that was considerably more assertive and considerably less deferential to the existing arrangements, is make the mistake of responding to William's actions than the public narrative had suggested was in William's character. For those staff members who had been closest to the specific dynamics that William's moves targeted, the reaction was shaped by the uncomfortable recognition that they had misjudged the extent to which the existing arrangements were sustainable. Those within or adjacent to Camilla's network, who had been operating on the assumption that their position was sufficiently embedded in the palace's institutional fabric to be effectively immune to challenge, found that assumption revised with considerable force and considerable speed. The security they had felt, which was real and was based on a genuine and long-established pattern of institutional accommodation, turned out to have been contingent in ways they had not fully appreciated on conditions that William had now clearly and definitively changed. For staff members who were further from the specific targets of William's action, the reaction was shaped more by the broader implications of what they had witnessed. An experienced palace employee who has spent years watching the institution manage its internal tensions through the careful avoidance of anything that might be characterized as open confrontation, suddenly finds themselves in a changed landscape when someone at William's level of the family hierarchy decides to act with the directness he demonstrated in early 2025. The norms that everyone within the institution had understood to govern how internal disagreements were managed had been visibly and consequentially revised, and the revision had been made not by someone at the margins of the institution's power structure, but by the man who will one day be its ultimate authority. Senior courtiers who have served the palace through multiple chapters of its modern history and who have developed a finely calibrated sense of how institutional dynamics shift over time were among those who processed what had happened with the greatest depth of understanding and the greatest seriousness. Several of those familiar with the reaction at that level describe a recognition among the most experienced figures in the palace that what they had witnessed was not an isolated incident or a temporary disruption to the institution's normal rhythms. It was a statement of intent, a signal delivered through action rather than through words, about the terms on which the next chapter of the monarchy's life would be conducted and the kind of leadership that would define it. Camilla's response, measured, careful, and deeply revealing. In a different person, in someone less experienced in the particular demands of navigating power within the royal family, the discovery that the heir to the throne had moved deliberately and effectively against the network of influence you had spent years constructing might have produced a visible and emotionally charged response. Anger, perhaps, or defensiveness, or an attempt at open confrontation that might at least have had the virtue of clarity, even if it lacked the virtue of strategic wisdom. Camilla is not that person. She has demonstrated across decades of navigating one of the world's most complicated family and institutional dynamics that her capacity for emotional self-regulation in high-stakes situations is among her most formidable qualities. And the response she has shown to William's moves in the weeks and months since early 2025 reflects that capacity in ways that are, to those who understand the full context, deeply revealing. The surface of Camilla's response has been exactly what anyone familiar with her public character would have predicted, and exactly what the situation demanded of her. She has been composed, gracious, and visibly committed to the maintenance of the outward harmony that the royal family depends on as a matter of institutional survival. Her public appearances alongside Charles and with other members of the family have shown no visible sign of the tension that those inside the palace know to be present. Her interactions with William and Catherine in shared public contexts have been managed with a control and a social intelligence that reflects years of practice in presenting exactly the face that a given situation requires, rather than the face that an unguarded emotional truth might produce. But beneath that composed and carefully maintained surface, those who are close to Camilla and who have spoken with her in the period since William's moves were made describe a woman who is engaged in a form of internal reckoning that goes considerably deeper than the practical question of how to respond to a specific institutional challenge. The question she appears to be working through, according to those familiar with her private thinking, is not merely tactical. It is not simply a matter of identifying which moves are available to her within the current configuration of palace dynamics and choosing the most effective among them. It is a more fundamental question about the nature and the limits of the position she occupies within an institution that is visibly and actively reorganizing itself around a generation and a set of priorities that are not hers. Sources who know Camilla will describe a woman who understands, with a clarity that she has arrived at through long experience rather than through sudden revelation, that the position of queen consort is one whose authority and influence are entirely contingent on the monarch beside whom it is held. She built her place in the institution through her relationship with Charles, and that relationship remains the foundation of everything she has within the palace's power structure. What William's moves have confronted her with is the reality that the institution is already in meaningful and practical ways, but as the palace's attention turned increasingly toward questions of transition, toward the preparation of Catherine for her future role, beginning to orient itself toward a future in which Charles's reign is not the relevant frame of reference. And in that future, the foundations on which her position rests are considerably less stable than they have been during the years of the current reign. The specific thing that those closest to her say she is privately feeling is not something that maps neatly onto the simpler emotional categories that outside observers might reach for. It is not straightforward anger at William, though there is certainly a dimension of wounded pride in the recognition that her network was identified as a problem and addressed accordingly without any attempt at prior consultation or diplomatic softening. It is not fear for her formal position, which is constitutionally secure in ways that William's moves do not and cannot threaten directly. It is something more complex and more difficult to name, a recognition that the chapter of royal life in which she has the kind of informal but meaningful institutional reach that her network provided is drawing toward its close, and that the chapter that follows belongs to people whose vision of the monarchy and whose sense of its priorities is genuinely and significantly different from her own. What she has not done, and what those who know her well say, she's unlikely to do, regardless of how the situation develops, is make the mistake of responding to William's actions with anything that could be characterized as open opposition or visible resentment. She understands with the strategic clarity that has always been one of her most underestimated qualities that such a response would cost her far more than anything William's moves have already taken from her. The composed and gracious surface she presents to the world is not merely a performance. It is the expression of a genuine and hard-won understanding that in the particular world she inhabits, the maintenance of dignity in the face of difficulty is itself a form of power, and often the most durable form available. What this tells us about the monarchy: William is building everything about the way William handled his moves against Camilla's inner circle, the deliberateness of his preparation, the precision of his execution, the careful management of deniability, and the absolute clarity of the institutional message he sent to everyone within the palace who had the awareness to receive it, points towards something considerably larger than a single episode of internal palace politics. It points toward a vision already being actively implemented rather than merely contemplated, of the kind of monarchy William intends to lead, and the terms on which he will accept the transition of the institution from the generation that has defined it to the generation that will carry it forward. The most immediately striking characteristic of that vision, as revealed by his actions in early 2025, is its intolerance of the kind of parallel power structures within the palace that have historically been a feature of how the institution manages the coexistence of multiple royal households and multiple centers of dynastic interest. The monarchy has always been, in its internal reality, a more complicated and more pluralistic institution than its public face suggests. Different members of the royal family have always maintained their own networks, their own advisors, their own channels of influence within the institution's overall structure. That complexity has sometimes been creative and generative, providing the monarchy with a range of voices and perspectives that a more rigidly centralized structure would have lacked. But it has also, at various points in the institution's modern history, been a source of significant internal dysfunction, of competing agendas and misaligned priorities that have weakened the monarchy's ability to present a coherent face to the public and to make clear-eyed decisions about its own direction. William's actions suggest a clear and decided judgment that the period he is inheriting from his father will not be managed through that kind of pluralistic complexity. He appears to have concluded, on the basis of a careful and long-running assessment of the institution's situation and its needs, that the monarchy entering his generation requires a greater degree of internal coherence and directional clarity than a structure of competing networks and parallel influence channels can reliably provide. The action he took against Camilla's inner circle is best understood not as a personal move against Camilla, but as an institutional statement about the kind of internal architecture he believes the palace needs to function effectively in the decades ahead. That statement carries implications that extend well beyond the specific individuals whose positions within the palace were affected by his moves in early 2025. It signals to every figure within the institution's broad ecosystem of advisors, courtiers, and household staff that the coming reign will be characterized by a clarity of hierarchy and a directness of institutional authority that the palace has not always been known for in its recent history. People who have built their positions within the palace on the basis of complex and multi-directional loyalties, who have thrived in the space between competing royal interests and drawn their influence from the ambiguity of that space, are being put on notice that the space is contracting. The institution William is building will have less tolerance for ambiguity, less room for the parallel, and sometimes competing power structures that have characterized the palace's internal life, and a considerably more direct and unambiguous line of authority running from its center to its edges. What is equally clear from everything that William's actions reveal is that the monarchy he is building is one in which Catherine is not merely a participant or a supporting figure, but a genuinely co-equal partner in institutional leadership. The moves he made against Camilla's network were not made in isolation from the broader pattern of changes being implemented within the palace during the early months of 2025. They were part of a coherent and coordinated process of institutional realignment that included the expansion of Catherine's role, the deepening of her access to consequential decision-making conversations, and the deliberate construction of an internal palace structure that reflects the priorities and the vision of the generation that will lead the monarchy through its most consequential period of adaptation. Together, these developments paint a picture of a future king who has spent his years as rare, not simply waiting, but preparing, building an understanding of the institution's strengths and weaknesses with a depth and a specificity that is now beginning to find expression in concrete and consequential action. The patience that characterized his long preparation is giving way, at a pace and in a manner entirely of his own choosing, to the kind of decisive institutional leadership that the coming chapter of the monarchy's life will demand. And the palace staff, who found themselves stunned by what they witnessed in early 2025, are among the first people outside William's immediate circle to understand, with the clarity that only proximity to actual events can provide, that the monarchy's next chapter has already, quietly and consequentially, begun. What William did in early 2025 was not simply a palace dispute. It was a declaration about the monarchy he is already building, on his terms, at his pace, and with a precision that left no room for misunderstanding. Camilla's inner circle did not just lose influence. The entire institution shifted, and nothing inside those walls will be quite the same again.